Your daughter, who at the time was how old?
4.
4. She cried out. She cried. Daddy's been bitten by a snake?
Mm-hmm. Snake bit Daddy, Daddy's dead.
Daddy's dead.
Now, if I had to backtrack, like I said, you know, I felt I was to be a missionary as a kid. I spent a decade and more than a decade away from God. Just weeks before I came back, I decided to finally come back to God. And when I came back, my wife and I were just tortured with anxieties and fears in ways that we have never been done before. And I realized that really was just me departing my one path that, quite frankly, Satan was very happy for me to be, and going into being a Christian. And Satan did not want to fight fair. Mm-hmm. And you know, we prayed, and eventually we were delivered from that period of time. But then when we went on vacation, when we were there,
back.
Evil was back, and I don't think he really wanted to let go. I mean, I don't know. You know, only God knows His purpose for me. You know, I felt led to be a missionary as a child. I walked away from that path. You know, who knows what path I have going forward. Obviously, I'm here to tell a story. But when I was on that rock, about 75 feet up, I felt that my legs were ripped off from me. I was held about 4 feet in the air. I paused about 4 feet off the ground for a second, and then I dropped, hitting my knee on a rock, which essentially split my knee open in a very dramatic way. That's when I went over to the edge to yell, really looking down my brother-in-law's head, saying, "Hey, get up here," because I was so high up. Where at that point I felt very dizzy. I walked away from the edge, a couple feet away from the edge, put my hands on my knees, put my head on, you know, looking at the ground, figuring, uh-oh, if I pass out, I'm just going to fall flat. Well, I did pass out. But what happened, and this I have to go to my wife and my sister's perspective, is they said it looked like somebody just threw a rag doll off the cliff, where I did a dead somersault. And then eventually, as I landed, I hit about 30 feet off the desert floor. They missed it because they were on the floor. They heard the big thud. And but the exact moment that I felt like my feet were swapped up for me and then held up is the exact moment that my brother-in-law was feeling that sense of huge evil and that somebody was going to fall. He thought it was the 4 or 7-year-old kids that were with him. Mm-hmm. But when he got them off the small little 5-foot rock, he goes, "It's not over." And that's exactly when he heard me yell, "Ow!" roll out on that cliff. So yeah, it was you know, it's a lot of interpretations I've asked a lot of people, but you know, in my heart, I feel that, you know, evil wanted me that day, and at the end, God allowed that to happen. His covering went away from me because He had to teach me a lesson.
You know that song, "Mercy Said No."
Yeah, and
darkness and light stood face to face. Mercy said no.
And
the pace at which you came down off that mountain is also hard to explain in the natural.
What do you mean by the pace?
Well, just the force with which.
Oh, the force of 4.5. You know, if you fell 4.5 stories. I mean, I've separated my shoulder in soccer just falling, you know, just 5 feet. But to fall 4.5 stories and to land on those rocks, you know, my wife thought I was dead. She certainly thought I would be dead. And she found me. She could see about, well, if I do this, you can see the dent in my head right here. But you could see about this much of my skull, just all exposed, and she thought I was dead. You know, I wasn't, thankfully.
We have a couple of pictures of you looking not nearly as smashed up as you could have been.
That picture is the day after, when I came back from the hospital. It was my beautiful hospital garb and the general scrapes. If you have another picture, I think it kind of can show us there. That's day 3, I think, and that shows you can see the big impact where it was stitched together. I had 35 stitches in my head at that point. But the amount of impact, as you can see there, falling head first on the rocks below. All the rescue people, and there was amazing. God sent. I had 50 people come to help rescue me in this really remote area of Joshua Tree. 35 of which were medically trained.
Did you get that? 35 of 50 people who showed up in the middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. You hadn't even seen anyone all the time you'd been up there climbing. Had medical training. In fact, the first 2 men on the scene happened to have with them a neck brace and a backboard.
Yeah, it was EMT training. A trauma surgeon had a rock climb.
Unbelievable.
But it was quite amazing. But you know, when I was laying on that rock and I felt like I was dying. I felt like I was going in and out of dying. You know, and I hear my daughter at the desert floor screaming, you know, "Daddy's dead, Daddy's dead." It's a piercing sound that you never want to hear. But I was at peace. God gave me peace during that time. And when I was finally airlifted to the hospital, my first helicopter ride, and I got full CAT scans and full X-rays, and then I was kind of shocked. I'm laying on the bed, and all these doctors are coming to my bed. I mean, not just 1 or 2, but many, many, many. Finally, I said, "Hey, you know, what's going on?" And they said, "Oh, haven't you heard?" I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "They're calling you Miracle Boy." And I said, "What do you mean a miracle boy?" They said, "Well, we've done all the tests, we've done everything, and there's nothing medically wrong with you.
Who could even believe that?
You have no broken bones, you have no internal injuries, your skull is not fractured. In fact, your brain doesn't even represent trauma. We can't explain it medically, but you have nothing wrong with you. And even though you have great insurance, we're not going to cover you tonight, so you're free to go."
Go home.
Yeah. Yeah.
After a 4.5-story fall, angels had to catch you.
Absolutely. It's like I had some glancing blows on the way down, on like a little thing. But the main thing, the main impact, the instant deceleration that should have killed me, and if not, should have left me paralyzed, and certainly brain damaged. None of that happened, and so I am nothing special. In fact, I feel like I am the least of these, as Paul said, because as Paul said, because I had a life, I knew what was right, and I walked away from that life, and God, for some reason, decided to save mine, and I don't feel like I deserved it. I still don't feel like I deserve it. That's why every day I feel like a blessing. But He saved my life, and that was merely just the start of a very long journey of learning so many things about this world and about who I am.
And this was only the start. There's so much more we could say about that day. I mean, I think it's amazing that a van load of rescue, mountain rescue, climbing rescue people in training showed up. You yourself are a rescuer.
Oh, no, actually, I'm not.
Were you not at the time?
No, just a dork.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, I read that.
It's okay.
Really?
It's okay. Yes.
No.
Yes.
This, you talk about being hit by with a 2x4. There would be yet another, well, really a minor car accident that seemed to have a mission.
that's the story, right? I talked about how stubborn and egotistical I was. I'd always, in my party years, had always felt that God was always watching out for me, and the things I did that should have done horrible things myself, I always came out of it okay. And after this miracle, I felt, wow, I'm a motorcycle racer, I'm all this stuff, I'm just blessed. God's my big brother, He's going to watch out for me. And I really didn't have a change of heart. I didn't change who I was. Because remember, I spent a decade having the world define who I was. I spent all that time making God conform to me. Meaning I have this image of what I want to be and what I want to do, and so I make God conform to who I am, rather than me conforming myself to God. And after this, I didn't change my habits. I still cared how much people viewed me, how much I bench pressed, or all the stupid stuff in this world. That really
still fiercely independent?
Yeah, incredibly. In fact, I had a lot of control issues, obviously, right? And what I realized, well, I didn't realize yet, is that God said, "Oh, I didn't learn my lesson," which you thought I would have after a modern-day miracle. And so while driving home from work from Microsoft, I was rear-ended at a stoplight by a youth pastor. Yeah, how's that? And where I ended up getting a second concussion, a concussion on top of a severe concussion, which is that's severe brain trauma. Actually, that's bad, very bad, and which the devil got two birds with one stone that day, because that youth pastor was going to sell his car to help fund his missionary trip for the next year. Oh. And so he had those things derailed, and for me, my symptoms came back that I had from initial concussions, and I had so many more symptoms that essentially. I was a shell of my former self. It was amazing. God allowed me to keep my intelligence, I could work, I could do all this stuff, but He took away everything that I placed my value in. He purposely did that. It's funny. I believe God can teach us so much more in pain rather than in blessing. I think we look at our lives and we go, gee, or if our lives aren't going well, God, why are you doing this to me? I believe that's time for us to learn, and I went through weeks and weeks and weeks of anger at God. Why would you save me? To then have me becoming in this shattered physical and mental self that I was.
You say God used pain and suffering to guide and heal you.
Yeah.